spiritual wisdom I've got at all comes from the Buddha, comes from my Buddhist teachers, and that whenever I come across what appears to be a disagreement between different groups of practitioners, when I go back to what the Buddha says, I suddenly realise there's no disagreement at all. It's just two different perspectives on the teachings of the Buddha. And so as part of encouraging people to look back at the teachings of the Buddha, I like to hand out suttas. You can read them yourself at home. And these are the basis for what I want to talk about today. So the topic is basing your practicing gladness. So the one called active will is the one I want to start with today. And given that one's body has the nature to age, I'll bring out my body enhancement technology. Well, it is, you know. This is technology. It might have been invented several hundred years ago, but it's still technology. And one of the things this is one of my favourite suttas because it's actually shows you about karma, real karma. Very often people talk about karma or karma as if it's fate, like some kind of inevitable fate that you're born with from some past life. But when the Buddha talked about karma, that's not actually what he meant. Karma, as defined by the Buddha, is intentional or volitional acts of mind, speech and body. And those acts of intention have results. The results are called vipaka in the Pali language. So very often when we talk about karma in a cultural conversation, what we're actually talking about is vipaka. And also sometimes we talk about things that are just random, unpleasant stuff that may have nothing to do with our actions in this life or in a previous life. Not all things that happen to us are a result of karma. However, our volitional actions, our choices, do have results in our life. And this sutta, in a way, illustrates the sorts of results that are natural. So what it's saying, we start here, for a person endowed with virtue, consummate in virtue. So, as I understand, endowed with virtue, consummate in virtue, consummate, you know, it's the way you live your life. So, for example, this Metta Centre is an expression of virtue. It's an expression of giving, of kindness. It's the way that Tina lives her life. A continuous moment-to-moment choice and act of will. It is embedded in who and what she is. So people who are endowed with virtue, consummate in virtue, that means that virtue is embedded in their life. It's who and what they are. Tina would no more think of walking over and punching somebody in the face than like jumping off a cliff and flying. It's just not what she does, right? It's not who she is. It would never happen. It just wouldn't ever happen, right? Never. Right? No. Whereas somebody who's not consummate in virtue, they might do such a thing on a regular basis, yeah? And there's somebody who's not consummate in virtue who actually on a regular basis punches somebody in the face, actually probably will end up as one of your clients. Because of the, unwholesome results of that unwholesome action.
So,
okay.
How would you define virtue in this context?
Virtue is a translation of the word sila.
Okay.
So this sila is engaging in acts that have positive outcomes for yourself and for others, and acts of mental acts of thought, verbal acts of speech, and physical acts of body that benefit you, benefit others, benefit the world. Yeah. And the Buddha encourages us each to discern what that is for ourselves. Whilst we get things like precepts and stuff, ultimately the purpose of precepts is to help us work out what harming and non-harming is, because sometimes it's not easy to discern that, and our delusion can lead us to believe that something that is harmful is actually beneficial for us. And we see that a lot in the regular world, where people think that anger is actually beneficial. And I'll have people say to me, "Oh yes, but how could you stand up against slavery if you don't have anger?" It's like, well, I could very easily stand up against slavery without getting angry about it. I can have compassion for all of the people involved, both the victims and the slavers, because it's not going to actually karmically be much good for the slavers either. I can really stand up against that and say this is harmful for everybody, and I don't have to get angry. You know, I can be incredibly concerned. So anger is often cited as one of those things that's actually unwholesome. Now, just because you have anger coming up does not mean you have to judge yourself harshly. That's not useful. That's also not beneficial. So, for example, if something comes up, such as anger or fear, the Buddha says in another sutta, Dvaita Vitāka, Majjhima Nikāya 19, that the first act is to discern that it is harmful. Right? And sometimes that's the difficult bit, to discern that it's harmful. Then, having discerned that it's harmful, what you don't do, and is a mistake some people do when they're doing vipassana, which is so an unwholesome mind state has arisen, and they sit there all day contemplating that unwholesome mind state. Oh yes, anger, fear. That just makes it bigger and stronger, particularly if you're doing that in your life. Oh, anger, fear. Jealousy. The Buddha says in Dvaita Vitāka to investigate the harmful nature, the karmic effect of that mind state. Right? And if you see the karmic effect of the mind state, then naturally you just won't want it hanging around. In number 20, the 5 ways of dealing with unwholesome thoughts, one of the similes is like, if you notice you've got an unwholesome mind state, it's as if a youthful person, fond of ornaments, noticed they had a dead dog hanging around their neck. Ew. I think you might want to get rid of it, pretty quickly, and go and have a shower. Yuck. So when we notice these unwholesome mind states, the best thing to do is get rid of it. And the way to get rid of it is to notice how harmful it is to us. Now that brings me back to here, where the opposite is to notice when we have wholesome, beautiful, beneficial mind states. And virtue is the state of having beneficial actions. Now naturally, beneficial actions have to come from beneficial mind states. And they cause beneficial mind states, right? So if you are developing generosity, developing kindness, developing compassion, developing, classically it says renunciation, but renunciation of all things that harm you. doesn't mean letting go of everything. Letting go of attachment doesn't mean to say letting go of absolutely everything. It only means letting go of things that harm you and that harm others and that obstruct your path to Nibbana. So, if you have virtue, that is, you don't kill anybody, you don't punch anybody in the face, you don't steal things, you don't tell lies, you don't sleep with somebody else's partner, you don't go out getting drunk and drugged, right? If you don't do all of those things, then you have virtue, right? And when you have virtue, when that is how you live your life, so this is what it means by endowed and consummate. This is how you live your life. There is not a single day that goes by that you punch somebody in the nose. There's not a single day that goes by that you sleep with somebody else's partner. You just don't do that stuff. It would never occur to you to do that stuff. The idea doesn't arise. That's what it's just part of who you are, right? And when that is the kind of life you already have, then you don't have to have an act of will. May freedom from remorse arise in me. Right? Because you didn't sleep with somebody else's partner, you don't have to feel remorseful about it. Right? You don't have to go, I wish that I wasn't remorseful. So what have I got to be remorseful about? No remorse arises. You don't have to, it's not an act of will, it's a natural result. If you didn't steal anything, the police are not going to knock on you don't have to be afraid of the police knocking on your door, right? You didn't steal anything, you don't have to feel bad about it. So it is natural. Just like water runs downhill, you know. It's just if you've got water at the top of a hill and you pour it out, you don't have to say, may the water run down the hill. It just will. So there's no need for an act of will, may freedom from remorse arise in me. It is in the nature of things that freedom from remorse arises in a person endowed with virtue, consummate in virtue. For a person free from remorse, there is no need for an act of will. May joy arise in me. Have you noticed that? Like when you're good, it makes you happy. Now that joy is a translation of pamoja, the Pali word pamoja. And pamoja is the everyday gladness. The gladness that comes from doing a good job. The gladness that comes from doing a kind deed. The gladness that comes from keeping a clean life, you know? Where you're just glad. It's a normal, everyday gladness. And one of the 40 meditation objects, you know, there's a list of 40 in the Abhidharma. And one of them is Sila Nusati, to contemplate your goodness. So, when we've had a really, really busy day and we go to meditate, sometimes there's stuff going all around in the head, right? So, it's really helpful to start our practice by contemplating our goodness. Because when we contemplate our goodness, then gladness naturally arises. Because where you're free from the remorse, there's no need for an act of will. May joy arise in me. You may have to remind yourself, actually, I'm free from remorse. I'm a good girl. I'm a good boy. I'm actually really good. And the Buddha said I should feel glad about that. Not only am I allowed to feel glad about that, but I should feel glad about that. It's not the same as feeling proud about it. It's not the same as standing on top of the building with the megaphone going, I'm really good. But if you sit on your meditation mat and you go, actually I'm pretty good. I'm allowed to be happy because I am, in fact, pretty good. You might think, but in the privacy of your own room, really let that joy come up. Let it arise strongly. Feel glad about all the good things you do. And everybody in this room, even you, right? You do good things, don't you? Yeah, I bet you do. And then if you remember something you did that perhaps wasn't so good, you can go, okay, well, embracing imperfection. I don't have to be perfect. I'm not the Buddha yet. Okay? It's alright, I do my best. Perhaps I didn't get it completely 100% right there, but that's okay. I'm pretty good in all these areas. And then when we actually let that joy come up, that pamojana, that natural everyday gladness, some people get from gardening, some people get from a good job, then there's no need for an act of will. May rapture arise in me. Now, rapture is piti sukha. It's the nature of things that rapture arises in a joyful person. And you get all that chills coming up the spine. Little goosebumps. I'm so happy. My meditation's so good. No, it's okay. You're allowed to be happy. And then, because you're really happy, your body just relaxes. If you're feeling happy in your mind, your body's naturally going to relax. It's cause and effect, right? If you're upset, your body's not relaxed. When you're happy, your body is easier to relax. You might have to remind it to. It might have got into a habit of being all tight. So you go, look body, look how happy we are. It's okay, you can chill out now, relax. Yeah, you too. Yes, and that muscle too. It's okay. And you kind of take that happiness and you kind of wash your body with it. And you let your body feel the happiness and you spread all that happiness through your body. And as the happiness spreads through your body, it relaxes. And when the body is relaxed, serene, tranquil, well, there's no need for an act of will. If your body's relaxed, may I experience pleasure, I reckon that's pretty pleasant. You might have to remind yourself to notice, hey, look how pleasant it is. Sukha Vedana. Actually, it's pleasant now, my body's all relaxed. Hey, this is nice. How can anybody think meditation's difficult and horrible and hard? This is really nice. Yum. Bit of pleasure, it's good. So when you're experiencing pleasure, so what have we got? We've got joy, maybe the rapture came and kind of settled down again, the body's serene, we're experiencing pleasure. The mind is going to grow still. Now I don't particularly like the word concentrated here. It's a translation of samadhi. In English, the word concentrated tends to have the overtone of pushing. It's a bit constipated. I've got to be concentrated. Whereas that's not what's meant by samadhi. Samadhi is when it's just easy to stay with what you're looking at. You know, like your favourite movie, your favourite song. Do you have to try to concentrate on your favourite song? Yeah, you've got so much pleasure from it that naturally your mind wants to follow along, with that. So if you've got a lot of pleasure with your meditation or just being still, then naturally your mind just wants to follow along, right? It's like you don't have to try to concentrate on your favourite movie. I must watch this movie. Nobody has to do that, right? You're so interested, you're enjoying the movie so much that naturally you're like, shh, don't talk to me now. I'm watching my favourite movie, shh, right? So it's like, don't talk to me now, I'm watching my favourite meditation object, shh. I'm sitting in my favourite spot, enjoying my favourite pleasure, having my favourite relaxed body, as opposed to my not favourite tense body. Right? Here I am in my favourite meditation spot, with my favourite relaxed body. I'll put the tense body back on when I go out into the world, my unfavourite body. But right now I've got my favourite relaxed body and it's jolly pleasant. And now I've got my favourite relaxed body. My mind is entering the stillness of samadhi. It's just like happy to be there. Doesn't need to think. Doesn't need to jump around. Doesn't need to go here and there. It's really happy just where it is. And so samadhi is when it's like really happy to stay there with whatever it's looking at, whether it's the breath, whether it's the body, whether it's the virtue, whether it's the qualities of the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. And as that samadhi, that stillness, deepens and develops over time, there's another simile of the deep, still lake. Yeah? So when the wind stops blowing and the surface of the lake's not ruffled, and there's no water weeds and there's no mud, and the water's really clear and still, if you sit there and look into the lake and it's really still and clear, you don't have to try. You naturally see the stones and the fish and the water weeds, right? Because you can see straight through the water because it's really still and clear. So straight away you can just see what's there. You can see, oh, look at those lovely stones and there's some weeds and look at the cute little fish in the weeds. So straight away you just see what's there. It's like really not that hard. And when the mind is still and clear, you know and see things as they actually are. You see arising and passing away. You see the nature of dukkha. You see the nature of anicca. You see the nature of anatta. Because the mind is still and clear and you just naturally see these things because that's what's actually there. You don't have to try. You don't have to push. You see what's there. And what's there is reality, right? When the mind's not all full of stuff, obscuring the view, you see, oh right, that's the way it is. That's what's real and what's not real. You see it for yourself. Nobody has to tell you. Like when you sit on the side of a lake, no one has to say, now look there's a stone and that's a fish, unless you like two or something, right? You are, darling, that's a fish and that's a stone, right? Because it's clear, we can just see that. We know what a stone is. So, you know, when we first came to the practice and we were two in the practice, someone had to go, yeah, that's suffering, and that's the process that calls itself a self. It's not that selfing doesn't exist, but it's just not really, really real, you know. It just comes and goes, causes and conditions. But it thinks it's real. And when the mind's still and clear, you naturally see that. And when you get kind of used to seeing that on a regular basis, then naturally you feel disenchantment, you grow dispassionate, and you realise the knowledge and vision of release. Well, that's the rest of the sequence. The first bit seems jolly obvious to me, so I reckon the rest of the sequence has a good chance of also being that really just sequential cause and effect. Yeah. So that's that one.
Before we go to the next sutta,
Yeah.
do you mind expanding on the difference between disenchantment and dispassionate?
Yeah, okay. So disenchantment is difficult in English because in the natural, ordinary language, disenchantment usually has a negative connotation. But that's because in the worldly world, the worldly, ordinary world thinks enchantment is a good thing. Right? So to be enchanted somehow is a good thing. But if you look at the actual deep meaning of the word enchanted, it means to be under a spell, to not be in control of how you perceive things, to have your perceptions distorted by a magical spell so that you see things differently to what they really are. And so that when a person is enchanted and under the spell of enchantment, they are not free to act as they would wish to act. They are compelled to act in accordance with the spell. Yeah? So, enchantment these days is often being enchanted with a beautiful sight, a beautiful object, and then spending all your time and effort in the pursuit of that beautiful object in order to possess and own it, with the misapprehension that the possession and ownership of that beautiful object, which actually might in fact be an actual living, breathing human being, right? But the enchantment tells us it's an object. This breathing, living human being is not a breathing, living human being, but a beautiful woman or man that you should obtain and own. Yeah? Which of course means that you're not really seeing the qualities of that person. You're not seeing a person with good qualities and weaknesses. You're seeing a beautiful object which you are pursuing in order to catch, obtain and own. This enchantment, this spell, sets up all sorts of distortions in then the relationship between you and that person. And you see what you want to see, which is a beautiful object to own, and they see in you a beautiful object to own, and neither of you sees a living, breathing human being with needs and strengths and weaknesses. Yeah. So when you have disenchantment, you break out of these kinds of spells that our cultural conditioning lays on us. The spell that says, in order to make my parents happy, I must obtain a beautiful partner and own them and produce beautiful offspring. Right. Have we heard this one?
quite common.
Quite common, yeah? So disenchantment is the breaking of that spell from knowing and seeing things as they actually are. No longer do we see a beautiful object that we must own. We see a living, breathing human being with strengths and weaknesses that may or may not complement our strengths and weaknesses, that may or may not be a person that we can form a meaningful relationship with that will enhance our strengths and diminish our weaknesses, where they help us become the best person we can be and we help them become the best person they can be, which is, you know, the ultimate good relationship. Right? But you can't find it if you can't see clearly. If you're not seeing clearly what's really there, then you are bound by the enchantment of seeing what you want to see, seeing what you expect to see, seeing what you feel you ought to see. Yeah? So when we have seeing and knowing things as they really are, we are able to have the disenchantment of breaking out of the spell. And then we are freed up to act in the most wholesome and beneficial way, instead of constrained and confined by that enchantment and that spell. Right, so that's disenchantment. The next stage of this is dispersion. Okay, so if I no longer see an object that I must own, that car, that person, no longer do I need to get all fired up with passions. I love you, I madly love you. All that stuff, right? Right? All the fires and volcanoes and depths of depression and, you know, the chasm of loneliness. I cannot get the man of my dreams. I shall now plunge into the chasm of loneliness. Right? That's passions. Right? All the movie stars have them, right? The passions. That's what makes a good movie, right? When the leading actors are maximally tortured by maximum passion. I love you, I madly love you. Oh no, he's leaving me. Come back, come back. I shall now plunge off the cliff into depression. Who can have an equanimous life with that, you know? This is not equanimity. So once you can see things as they really are, you break out of the enchantment of this magic spell of thinking that object is something that it actually isn't and will give you happiness that it probably never will. Then you don't need to engage in the drama of passion. Then you're free to have true loving kindness. You can have true compassion. You can have true joy in the success of others instead of the passion of jealousy because you didn't get it. You can have equanimity when things are other than you would like them to be. When your beloved has a deadly illness and is dying, right, which happens. instead of engaging in the passion of, oh no, how will I live without you? Right? Which doesn't help them at all, you know, they're hurting. They've got the deadly illness. Give over on the passion and get them a drink of water, you know? And you see it in hospitals all the time, right? The person is like dying or really deadly ill, and it's like, oh no, my relatives are coming around. Because they're in pain and they're suffering, and then they have to put up with their relatives, their parents or their partners or their children coming in and doing this big passion thing. Oh no! Oh, you're so sick! Oh, I can't curb it. God, stop.
Do you service hospitals?
Yeah, I'm a chaplain sometimes. Not very good at it. I'm a bit too passionate, really. And you know the Buddha Dharma's saying, I'm clearly a passionate sort of person, that's my nature. And so I really see the liberation that the Dharma gives me from all this passion and this drama. You know, my life's so much happier without it. Actually happier, you know, because the happiness is sustainable over a really long time, a really long period, moment by moment, hour by hour, day by day, week by week, month by month. You can be gently happy for really long periods of time. But when you soar up into excitement and plunge down into grief, you know, this is not a sustainable way of living, and yet so many of us live like that. So this is the difference between dispassion and disenchantment. I think I actually really understood that one. So any other comments or questions on this one? Because we don't have to do the others. That won't be the first time I haven't done the others.
I wouldn't mind talking a bit more about virtue, because that just, sorry, if I may.
Yeah, sure.
It just seems like the start of it all, isn't it? Like
It
you
is.
can't have the concentration without the virtue, but I'd like to understand it better in terms of, so as I understand, it's not just not doing negative stuff, but it's also doing positive stuff.
Mm.
But I sometimes, it's such a complex terrain, you sometimes get the do-gooder thing, or you sometimes do too much of one thing at the expense of other important things you need to. It's like, it is actually quite a complex thing, and, what do you think is the most important sort of compass in living a virtuous life? Because you're constantly faced with difficult choices, and they're not all clear, and you should be trying to be as goody two-shoes as you can. Not goody two-shoes, I don't mean it like that, but you can just follow your heart and do what's kind and good. But there's so much you can do, like how do you, and sometimes it's like the small things that kind of give you the most joy as well. And, I don't know, sorry,
No, I think it's a really relevant question, because it is the beginning of the whole thing and is like the foundations of the practice. And the practice is very wobbly when your virtue's not solid and stable. And I think often the process of embedding virtue into your life can be a bit of a balancing act, and it's a constant discernment, and it gets more and more subtle. So the examples I used were obvious and gross and really easy. Right? But as you get, like some people in their lives, those obvious gross things are not obvious to them, So you see that range, and particularly in a legal practice, you would come across people who don't realise really obvious gross things about virtue. However, for those of us who kind of got a handle on the obvious stuff, then we start working with more and more subtle stuff. And one example I can give you is when I left the monastery in America and I came to Australia, and I went to my mum's house, and I had to look at, well, my mum needs a carer. The thing of most compassion and kindness is to be mum's carer. Should I stay being a nun? Because I'd come across monastics who'd made the choice of disrobing in order to care for their parent. So should I disrobe and be a lay person, or should I stay a monastic and sometimes have to actually be more flexible around the monastic rules, right? Because some monastics will say it's not possible to be a carer of a parent, and at that time I had no support and no help, and keep the monastic rules strictly. And that's true. So that one I pondered along a lot. So this is more on the subtle level we're talking about. So I went to the Kalama Sutta, and there the Buddha gives us the criteria for making decisions. So I thought to myself, is being a nun beneficial or harmful to me? Well, it's beneficial to me, was very, very clear. Is being a nun beneficial to others? And at first that wasn't clear. But over time, even though at that time I was actually handling money, because, you know, my mum's now 86, at that time she was 83. Am I really going to say, Mum, you have to get out the car and pay for the petrol? Really? I tried it once or twice, didn't feel good. No, I really did, right? We tried this, and on reflection I thought, no. So, you know, kind of had to find our way through that. And then as I was doing things like taking her shopping, I would have people run up to me in the shopping centre and go, oh, are you a nun? Wow. We have nuns in South Australia, really? I'm like, well, you do now. You know? I also had, are you a Hare Krishna? I had, are you a hairy Krishna? I said, well, no. I also had one Sri Lankan family gasp with shock and horror as I paid for the shopping. So, you know, but overall, as I was going around and being visible, I was seeing that the site of a samana, where there were none, was a beneficial thing for people. So I thought, okay, tick, beneficial for others. Is it harmful for others, the fact that I'm having to compromise a bit on my sila, on my, you know, extreme monastic rules? I would really prefer not to, but where's the benefit harm here? So each time I review, is this harmful or is this beneficial? What's my intention here? So the time that I handled money just to buy an iced coffee when I actually didn't need one, nah, that's just going over into greed. You didn't need to do that. And so I resolved not to do that again. So you can see it's like this constant reviewing. Is this working? Is it not working? Making my mum get out the car to pay for petrol, this is not working. Buying an iced coffee when I pay for petrol, that's going too far. Right? So trying to constantly review what's beneficial, what's harmful. Now I have an anagarika, so she's in her 30s. Can I ask her to get out the car and pay for petrol? Yes. You know, these kinds of things. So slowly just finding my way, and as time goes on and I'm getting more and more support, then it's becoming more and more easy to keep to retake up the extra rules again. But I think it's not unlike the same thing that regular non-monastic people have. It's like, oh, well, I'm now in this situation, what is beneficial, what is harmful, and it's because only you know your context and circumstance. That's why the Buddha says we have to make these calls for ourselves. And it's a refinement of discernment without judgment. Right? So we have to make a judgment call, but without the judgment of this is good or this is bad. And if I'm bad, then I better get up a cat of nine tails and beat myself. No, none of that, you know. Don't. If you got it wrong, well, you tried, and we'll do it better. You know, like I got it wrong when I bought that iced coffee. That wasn't, that was the wrong decision. What does the Buddha say in the Vinaya when I make a wrong call like that? He says, did you know that it was wrong? Have you worked out that that was wrong? And I'm like, yeah, I've discerned that what didn't work. Are you going to not do that again? No, I'm not going to do that again. Very good. Carry on. Yeah? That's the way it's phrased. Like in the Vinaya for the monks and nuns, apart from the Parajikas, you know, where you're just not monk and nun anymore, most of the rules, it's like, don't do that. Did you know that that was wrong? Well, I'm not sure that it was. Well, if you don't confess it, they can't do anything. But it's like, oh, look, I did this wrong thing. I now realise it's wrong. So you realise it's wrong? Wrong as in not beneficial for me to do that. So right and wrong is the right way to Nibbana is right, and the wrong way leads away from Nibbana. So indulging in desire for iced coffee leads me away from Nibbana. Helping out my mother by driving her to a podiatrist appointment, I think, leads me towards Nibbana. It develops that kindness. At least I think so. I could be wrong. But when I look at the effect it has on my heart, then there's the next thing. What was the effect on my mind? What was the effect on my practice? Now I did that thing. Now looking back, how, like, for example, here's the state of my mind now. Then I watch the news. What's the state of my mind at the end of watching the news? Is it more peaceful, more happy, more kind? No, it's not actually. At the end of watching the news, my mind is more agitated, more distressed, and less peaceful. So the result of watching the news, having done a before and an after review, before the news my mind was in this state, after watching the news my mind was in that state, and my mind was in a state that was less wholesome afterwards than it was before. So I then thought, well, I'm not going to watch the news. And then people said to me, oh, if you don't watch the news or read the newspapers or look at it on the internet, how will you know what's going on? And I went, why do I need to know? How does it help my practice? How does it help me benefit the world? How does it help me give more kindness to the world to watch the news? It doesn't. Well, you know, how will you know what to help? Well, no, I do what I can do. And if something arises that I can do something about, then I'll do something about it. You know? I get the regular, vase petitions. My name's on those petitions. I send letters to my MPs about things. If an issue is quite important, people tell me about it, and I do something about it. Enough people around me watch the news, I hear what's going on. I don't need to do that to my mind. My mind's a precious jewel, so I protect it from those negative influences. Does that make sense in terms of sila? So part of it is this wholesome, is it unwholesome? And then what is the effect on my mind? What is the effect on my heart? What is the effect on my life? What is the effect on people around me?
Like if you're trying to help someone who has a lot of negativity in them, that has a negative effect on you, but then helping them has a positive effect. It's like really those kind of things. You just have to look at overall effect. Is that the sort of thing?
Well, in terms of helping someone with a lot of negativity, I come across that a lot in my own work. And you have to do it without attachment to a result. Right? If you have attachment to a result, then you are not giving, you are having a transaction. Right? A gift is given without expectation of something in return. So if you're trying to help somebody, you need to do it without expecting that it will necessarily have any effect. It might, and then again, it might not. And that's where the equanimity comes in. The equanimity about a result. So we have the good intention to make a contribution. We offer them some jewels of Dhamma, of wisdom. We do our best to help them understand it. And then, if they're able to take that on and work with it, we are joyful. If they're not able to take that on and work with it, we respect their free will, their choices, their autonomy, and go, okay, that's the way it is. And it may be that with some people, after you may persist, or you may choose to work with someone who's able to accept that. If someone doesn't want it, or can't accept it, or can't take it on, or maybe they can take on a little bit, and that's as much as they can take on right now. We are joyful that they are able to take on that much. But if we're not attached to a certain particular outcome, then the lack of that outcome doesn't hurt us. If the outcome is other than what we would like it to be, then that's the way it is. I'm sorry, but that's the way it is. I still love you. Even though you're horrible, I still love you. Whatever, You're angry, you are what you are. And you're entitled to that if that's what you want, I can't see a way that, because this does come up for me quite a bit in various contexts, where I will do my best, but I have to be disengaged from the result. Does that make sense to you too? Because you would have that situation a lot as well, wouldn't you?
Absolutely. And we shared before about the garbage with the hot water as well.
Yeah.
So people coming and dumping all of their troubles and problems, and us being able to take that, but at the end of the day we should also let it go.
Let it go, yeah. And not be attached to whether or not they'll still have exactly the same troubles and problems next time we see them. That they're dumping their on us or they're sharing with us doesn't make that stuff ours, doesn't make it our responsibility. Our responsibility is to do what we can do and let them be who they are. That's who they are. To have tolerance and acceptance that people are often not what we want them to be. It's bad enough with clients, but it often happens with relatives too. And their case never ends.
And do you think also an understanding of karma is important too, to appreciate that everyone does have their own journey and also the karma they have to live with?
Yeah. And the karma in terms of their choices, right? That you may see someone making bad choices and offer them the suggestion that particular choice is harming them, that perhaps they might like to reconsider whether they would like to continue making that sort of choices because those sorts of choices are harming them. But have the understanding that these kinds of habits are really hard to break and that they may be victims of enchantment, of delusion, of not being able to see that their choices are causing them harm. They may not be able to see that. They may not be able to see what you're telling them. And that is their karma. That's their choice. And we don't have a right to take people's choices away from them, whether we agree with them or not. It's not our right. It can be really painful watching someone like metaphorically hitting themselves on their head with a hammer. You know, like they go through their life and they've got this big hammer and they keep whacking themselves on their head, and it's like, you know, if you would just stop hitting yourself on the head with the hammer, you'd have a lot less pain. And they're like, but I like my hammer. I like my drug addiction. I like my anger addiction. It lets me know I'm alive. And that's their karma. As in, that's their choice. We can offer them the information. We can offer them suggestions, but if they don't take it on, then we have the equanimity. And equanimity is, that's their karma, that's their choice. I am not them. And I've done the absolute best I can do. I have given them the most precious gift of Dhamma. It's entirely up to them what they do with it. It's so sad when they flush it down the toilet, but you know, well, there's nothing else to do. You know? You can't send people to, what is it they used to have in China, the camps where you had the reorientation of the mind camp. You know. Was that really compassionate? Really? You know? So.
You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
Exactly. When the Buddha was asked, will everybody get enlightened? Sariputta came up with the simile actually, and the Buddha really liked it. The simile of a city with a very tight wall around it and one gate, and the wall was so tight that no animal bigger than a cat could get in. And Sariputta said, we can't really tell whether every person in the world will come to this city, But every person who comes to this city has to come in through the gate. Right? So we can't tell whether every person in the world will come to Nibbana, but every person has to come through seeing and knowing the nature of reality. Whether or not they come through the classical Buddhist teachings or not, I mean, there are plenty of Pacceka Buddhas around. Pacceka Buddhas are people who work out their own enlightenment without ever hearing the Buddha's Dharma. So they worked out how to see the nature of reality for themselves, and they got to Nibbana.
Isn't it that they just didn't teach? Isn't that?
There's that aspect too, but they worked it out for themselves. Right? So Pacceka Buddhas existed before, like they're frequently in the Jatakas, for example. So these are people who didn't teach, but they also worked out their enlightenment for themselves. So it's not that the Buddha's Dharma is the only way to Nibbana, but that the Buddha's Dharma is true whether or not a Buddha teaches it. Because he also said that, right? The Dharma is true whether a Buddha teaches it or whether a Buddha doesn't teach it. Truth is true. It doesn't matter whether you believe in gravity. If you step off a cliff, you will fall. You know? The gravity is true whether scientists teach it or not. Getting to Nibbana requires seeing and knowing things as they really are. So that's true whether you work that out for yourself or whether a Buddha teaches it. I'm not spiritually advanced enough to work that out for myself, but I'm glad enough to find the Dharma so that I get it from the Buddha, so that's cool for me. Any more comments or questions? They're good questions, by the way. Are really high quality questions.
I have some questions.
Brilliant.
Questions.
About disenchantment, dispassion again. Maybe you can explain about passion. Yeah. Some people feel that it's important to be passionate, to be truly engaged with a cause or an activity that you're doing. And when you're totally engaged with that, then you also lose a sense of yourself from that. And perhaps what the Buddha is talking about here is quite different, where there is a sense of attachment if things don't go towards to what your life is. But that sense of attachment requires a level of, perhaps a level of reflection as well. Maybe you can just explain that a bit, like how is passion okay sometimes, or for particular is passion necessary to do something effective and well?
Well, maybe I'll start with attachment first.
Yeah.
Because you talked about that. And if I recall correctly, where I saw the Buddha talking about letting go of attachment was in terms of that attachment that leads to bhavatanha, vibhavatanha, and kamatanha. So he didn't actually say to let go of all attachment, but craving for kamatanha, craving for pleasant sights and smells and activities, right? That craving for sensual pleasures, craving for existence and craving for non-existence. they're the types of attachment or the types of craving that leads to staying in samsara, around and around. So it's very specific in terms of what kind of craving needs to be let go of. Kamha tanha, bhava tanha, vibhava tanha. Craving for sensual pleasures, craving for existence, and craving for non-existence, whatever that means. So in terms of this sequence where we're talking about seeing and knowing, disenchantment, dispassion, the specific type of passion it's talking about is the kind of passion that arises from enchantment through not seeing and knowing things as they really are. Right?
Yeah.
The kind of passion that arises from delusion, from distortion, from lack of understanding. So it's a specific type of passion.
Sure.
It's not necessarily all passion. Because the Buddha clearly had a lot of energy for the Dhamma. Perhaps in English we might call that passion for the Dhamma, right? A lot of teachers have passion for the Dhamma. But this is not the kind of passion that arises from delusion and not seeing things as they really are. So, in turn, because of course English is a language you're going to be, you've got to be careful about, because the Buddha didn't speak English. And English is not a good match as a language for a lot of the concept spaces that the Buddha was talking about. So I'm not sure that it necessarily means, in terms of dispassion, that all kinds of passion are disallowed. So when you see clearly things as they really are, and you find yourself moved to do beneficial actions, and you have a great deal of energy arising, and a great deal of determination arising, right? In the pursuit of those beneficial actions. I think we might call that passion for what you're doing, but I don't think it's the same kind of passion that we're talking about. I must have that sports car, right? It's like in English we use the same word love for I love my mother and I love pizza. But when I say I love my mother, it does not mean I'm going to sprinkle her with cheese and put her in the oven. Right? These are very different things. I promise you I will never sprinkle my mother with cheese and put her in the oven, you know? So I think we have to be careful with English, yeah? So I think when I say I love pizza, I probably, if I was being very careful, I probably would actually more say that I don't actually love pizza. Perhaps I should use something else. I love Coca-Cola. No, I don't even love Coca-Cola. Iced coffee, yeah. I don't know. I love Thai curry. Meaning I have a great deal of desire arising in my lips and mouth and tongue for the taste of Thai curry if I know that's today's dana. Particularly on a day that I know that Thai curry has been brought for dana, all this desire arises in my mouth. So that might be I love Thai curry. But I must say, that doesn't happen when I'm thinking of my mother. It's a completely different reaction. When I think I love my mother, I think, I want to give her a big hug. I want to make sure she's warm and safe and that she has good food to eat. Yeah. I want to take care of her and make sure she's not lonely, not sad, not hungry, that she doesn't fall over in the night and there's nobody there to help her. That's what I mean when I say I love my mother. This is a whole different thing, right? So when we say we have passion for the Metta Centre, right, I think that's a very different thing to saying, I have a passion for motorsports. I really like watching fast vehicles belching smoke and going around and round in circles while people shout. Clearly I don't have a passion for motorsports. So I have a passion for football, right? Probably means rather more than I really enjoy watching scantily clad men chasing a leather air-filled bladder around a playing field while lots of people shout. It's probably not what they mean by passion for football, but perhaps it is. But saying I have a passion for helping people in need, I think it's like rather different, you know. And I have a passion for beautiful girls.
Would you say the equivalent in terms of the Pali translation of passion? Are you talking about tanha?
That's usually, I think it's that's craving, and passion I think is possibly raga or something. I'm not quite sure what the Pali word is that they're using for passion. I have to go and look. Darn, I'm not Ajahn Sujato. He would just know that.
Well, you talked about tanha just now in the context of Four Noble Truths. So, and I certainly understand where you're coming from, because tanha, it's this unquenchable thirst, right? And there's an angst to it, as opposed to the passion for the Dhamma practice. It's the complete opposite.
It's really different, isn't it? Yeah. And the unquenchable thirst for beautiful sense objects and sensory, sense pleasures is completely different to the passion for the Dharma, the passion to do good, the passion to be of benefit in the world, the passion to help people. I don't think that's the same thing. I just see a different effect on them. So back to our discussion, if we look at the effect on the mind, the effect on the practice, right? So the effect on the mind of running after sensory pleasures, such as, I don't know, cars, football, boyfriends, girlfriends, iced coffee, Thai curry, whatever sensory pleasure does it for you, and the effect on the mind of helping people, of running a charity, of running the mitra, of running the Metta Centre, of giving Dharma talks. I think these have a very different effect on the mind, a very different effect on the practice. And if we take that before and after shot, in terms of increasing tranquility, stillness, happiness, joy, I think if we're doing having a passion for our good works, we could say, yeah, actually, my happiness meter is going up. There was a study I heard of that was actually done in the 70s about happiness in England or something, and they found that so-called like worldly pleasures, your happiness goes up and then it comes back down to where it was before. Right? And in your life, if you only go through worldly pleasures, basically your overall happiness pretty much stays the same. You just, you get something pleasurable, it goes up for a while and then it comes back to where it was. You get something unpleasant, it goes down for a while and then it comes back to where it was. And ultimately you go pleasant up and down, unpleasant down and up, and your actual overall level of happiness stays the same all the way through your life, pretty much. Whereas with spiritual practice, your actual overall happiness level can gradually increase. your capacity for happiness increases. Your ability to be happier and sustain that new level of happiness increases. And I think that's what doing things like the Metta Centre, the Mitra, charity work, being a monastic, it just actually increases gradually, like the gradual path, gradually your life becomes happier and happier. So if I look at now my base level of happiness, and yeah, there's up and down, you know. Some days I'm happier than other days, you know. But overall, in terms of, say, putting a line through the dots in a graph, you know, my overall base level of happiness is much higher than it was 5 years ago, when that was higher than it was 5 years before that. And if I look at, compared to 20 years ago, it's hugely different, right? So therefore my spiritual practice is increasing this base level of happiness in my life. It's a kind of where, you know, the baseline where you go up and down from, you know. And I think that's a good place to look at these questions of what does this mean? Is that a helpful discussion of that?
Good.
All right. So, are we running out of questions yet? Have we had enough?
I've got another.
Good.
I like a good question, but I can ask a bad question if you don't mind.
Oh, bad questions are good. One for her, and then you have another turn?
One
each, you know.
Meaningful and worthwhile.
Pardon?
I'm sure his is far more meaningful and worthwhile.
Not necessarily.
So,
Yours last one was pretty good.
I'm expecting. Actually, it's this. I was going to say, speaking of passion, craving, and boyfriends. I knew it! But I thought, no, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt.
Passion, craving and boyfriends, yes. The affliction of the young,
Or the old but deluded. My question is, like, sometimes it's not just with those kind of relationships, but a lot of relationships there's like a mutuality aspect of it. It's not kind of just like giving like you would to a child, you know, or to a pet or something where you really don't expect anything in return. There is a conditionality and there is an expectation behind it. It's really hard sometimes. Like, you know, if you get annoyed at something because it doesn't meet your expectation, to know whether that's not being kind or whether it's like reasonable or like, you know, it's not really such a pure thing.
No, it isn't.
Yeah.
Not a lot pure about interpersonal relationships most of the time. Even you know, between friends.
Yeah, there's expectations.
There's really expectations, and from what I see with people that have good relationships, and I have to talk about them because I never did. I only had failed romantic relationships, so I'm probably not the right person to answer this question. But when I look at people whose relationships are working in terms of giving them a wholesome context, they're pretty clear about their expectations. And they're pretty clear about their boundaries too. So one partner might say, I have these expectations of you, and the other partner says, you've just crossed the line. I'm not prepared to actually accept that expectation. And so there's a negotiation process goes on of expectation versus boundaries. But if you don't have some way of negotiating it, because it's not always verbal, that negotiation. Not all partners. The partners I see that are successful in terms from the outside, seem to have somehow magically negotiated that conversation. Goodness knows how. But eventually, when you see the ones that have been together 25, 35, 45, 55 years, somehow they've come to a shared understanding of boundaries and expectations. Somehow. Sometimes it's like they got used to that expectation was never going to get filled, get over it. And other times, it's like they realise they're getting something else that they never thought they were getting. Sometimes they come to a negotiation of, and often I'm guessing that some of these negotiations are non-verbal. They some kind of dance goes on, emotional kind of dance happens between the two, and the more love and acceptance and compassion there is, the more acceptance that actually neither of us is perfect. And not only do you not have to be perfect, and he doesn't have to be perfect, and that kind of thing. That's really hard. Oh, it's never going to be perfect. That just doesn't exist. You could trade in this version of imperfect for another version of imperfect, but that's what you're going to get. Because everybody's imperfect. But it does come down to which set of imperfectness am I prepared to put up with? So some things are tolerable and other things are not tolerable. And
cheap Valentine's Day gifts.
that's actually tolerable. But being treated as if you're not worthy is intolerable.
I wouldn't even go that far.
Right? Now, the cheap Valentine's gift, if that's for example, is a symptom of lack of respect and lack of valuing and lack of nurturing, lack of cherishing, then that needs to be looked at. But if it's actually a symptom of this guy's got no taste but he's really lovely, some guys have got absolutely no clue but they worship the ground you walk on. So what does this really mean? Does it really mean that he doesn't worship the ground you walk on? Does it mean that he actually doesn't value you? Or does it just mean he's got shock and taste? Now, bad taste and no idea of how to choose a present, this is tolerable. But someone who doesn't actually value you is intolerable. Do you see what I mean? What does it really mean?
In a more broader sense, I guess my question was like, with any relationship, whether it's with your partner or your parents or your friends or children or whatever, because of that mutuality, I guess my question is like, sometimes you feel like the Buddhist thing to do or what you're obliged to do is just to be like so generous and just give. But then I think maybe as you mature a bit, I find that actually for the sake of the relationship, and not just romantic ones, but in the longer term, there needs to be a lot of boundaries and self-respect and self-compassion in that as well. So that's what I meant, is like sometimes it's hard to know when asserting your own needs is actually the best thing for a relationship, and it's not just about being like the Mother Teresa kind of thing all the time, I guess that's kind of what
and once again, you've got to look at the benefit, right? So, for example, when you're giving, every act of giving should be for the benefit of the giver. Right? So giving here in the Metta Centre is for Tina's benefit. And if other people benefit, that's great. And while it continues to nurture and grow Tina's practice, it's a good thing for her to do. But if it comes to the point where the Metta Centre is actually detracting from her practice and is chewing her up and spitting her out, then that's not right. Right? So you give when it's of benefit to you to give. Not because they demand and expect it. That's not a gift anymore. That's a tithe. When it is demanded and expected, that's a tax. That is no longer a gift. Right? It's a responsibility. So if they're your children, then you have to give to them. But that's not a gift, that's a responsibility, and you're engaging in your responsibility to give to them because that's what you do. Right? And you give them guidance and you give them safety. But in terms of relationships, you don't give to appease them. That's not a gift. You don't give because that's what they expect. That's not a gift. Right? That's a responsibility. So in terms of, you start by valuing yourself. Right? And when I don't value myself, I give away things as a way of trying to pay other people to value me. If I give you all this stuff, then you'll value me. Then you'll see that I'm worthy. And that is never going to work. You're going to empty yourself because you're already empty. But if you work on valuing yourself and loving yourself, and seeing in yourself your own worth and goodness and value, then you don't need to give to pay other people to value you. Yeah, when you shift your relationship with yourself, then your relationships with other people shift too, as a result of that. When you value you, it sort of accidentally happens that other people value you. When you don't value you, then other people won't value you. So you don't work on trying to make them value you. You work on trying to make you value you. So I would recommend intensive metta practice for you, and you do not move from you as the recipient of metta until you can stay on yourself with true, real kindness of, I deserve my own kindness to me for 20 minutes. Without falling off it, without wobbling, without going, oh no, but when you can sustain 20 whole minutes of truly believing that you deserve your own kindness, then you can give metta to somebody else. And not just once, but at least 10 times. When you can do that, then you'll develop that, actually, if I'm worthy of being kind to me, then you can believe it and sustain that. Let me see what happens. So it's not about them. It's about us, isn't it? Give it a go. Okay. Your turn. That was a brilliant question, by the way.
Just going back to the beginning of the sutta, where it talks about an act of will, and it talks about someone who's endowed with virtue.
Pardon, sorry?
Someone who's endowed with virtue.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's about semantics, but for someone to have, so someone to form with karma, there needs to be intention.
Mm-hmm.
Intention for and then there's a result of the fruit of karma.
Mm-hmm.
So could you not say that intention, that good intention, is also an act of will? It's also an act. A will is a force of strong intention.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess in this passage it's saying that a person who is endowed with virtue does not necessarily need the act of will, but could you argue that even someone who has a lot of virtue, a lot of good karma, there's still a little bit about because we always make a choice, whether no matter what act it is, we're always making a choice. And habitually, you may be someone who does a lot of, already has a lot of virtue, but you're still choosing to do that.
Mm-hmm. I think we could talk. Let's return to grammar here.
Yeah.
What is the object of the phrase of the term act of will? That's not virtue, right? It's not saying you don't have to have an act of will to have virtue. It's saying if you have virtue, then you don't have to have an act of will to have non-remorse. So the act of will is applied to non-remorse, not to the virtue, right? So virtue is a continual act of will.
Right.
Right?
Okay.
It's a continual, moment-to-moment, day-to-day act of will. However, when you are endowed with virtue and consummate in virtue, it has become such a deeply embedded habit that most of it just runs on rails now.
Sure.
Right? You don't have to have an act of will not to shoot somebody. Right? You just wouldn't do that. That's what I mean, right? You may have to have acts of will about the more subtle aspects of virtue, right? And you would have acts of will about the subtle aspects of applying virtue to your day-to-day choices.
Sure.
But there's no act of will involved in not having remorse arise. All right, so it's the arising of remorse or non-arising of remorse, or perhaps arising of contentment with the kind of choices I'm making.
Sure.
Right? That's not an act of will, that's just a natural result. I feel contented with my choices. I don't feel discontented with my choices. And perhaps if I look back 30 years ago, where some of my choices were not particularly virtuous, and occasionally I will have remorse arise over some choices I made 30 years ago. But then I can think, well, I don't make those choices now. Yeah, I have remorse over that, but I've fixed that problem. I don't do that now, and I will never do that again. That situation's not going to arise. So then I can let go of that remorse that arose over things I did 30 years ago by realising that I don't do those things now. Yeah? So the non-remorse is the thing that the act of will is, or non-act of will is applying to. That was too easy. Come on. But I think we're getting on to 9:15, so we might think about wrapping up shortly.
It's actually 5 to 9. That's a little slow. I just realised what's the
Oh, well, obviously my internal clock was working better.
Yeah, clearly. Any other final questions?
Anybody who hasn't asked a question yet?
Well, we only got to the first sutta.
Well, that's not really surprising. It's a pretty good sutta.
Would you mind giving us a brief overview of the two? So at least when we go back and read it ourselves,
Yeah.
at least it places in context
Yeah.
the topic of facing or practicing gladness.
Well, the second one, which is proximate cause, is also called transcendental dependent origination. So the normal dependent origination talks about going around and around and around in samsara. This one is the dependent origination of going around in samsara and then leading out again. So in terms of basing the practicing gladness, sort of go into the middle of here a bit. And if you look at the middle of the page or a little bit below about there, so you might say concentration has a proximate cause, or samadhi, which is happiness. Happiness has a proximate cause, tranquility, and rapture has a proximate cause, gladness, and gladness has a proximate cause of faith. Okay, so I was going to look at the fact that having faith in the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha is also a cause for gladness to arise, and so we can bring up gladness in our practice by reflecting on our faith in the Triple Gem. And then that faith leads all the way out to liberation. So this one kind of goes backwards, goes from liberation back through faith and suffering and existence and birth and all that kind of thing. So one of the things that's really interesting is that it says that the cause of faith is suffering. That's a pretty interesting. And I think that's to do with the fact that some people, particularly traditional Buddhists, right, they may have known the Dharma, known about Dharma all their life, and it's not until something really terrible happens that they actually start acting on that faith. As in putting their faith into action and using their faith as a way to have a spiritual practice. And very often suffering is the trigger for that. When life is just too good, why would you bother? Meditate? No, I'm really happy the way I am. Don't need to, yeah? And so very often, particularly with people who grew up with the Dharma, very often suffering will trigger actually applying their faith to the practice.
When I first came across the transcendental dependent origination and then following through with the traditional understanding of dependent origination and having dukkha, suffering, as the link between the two, that was very interesting for me too. And certainly the first noble truth, you start with suffering. Yeah,
exactly. and that suffering can be a cause of faith is really, really... Personally, I think that birth is a cause of suffering is obvious. But yet, the world doesn't get that. And then the other one, so that one's just so fabulous that everyone needs to know the transcendental dependent origination. So I think that's just one to have in your files and check out from time to time and have a look through it, because normally we get only the regular dependent origination, which is the round and round and round and round and round and round and round, and this one's like round and round and out. So that's very cool. And the last one is actually one I just found. So this one's a new one to me, and I quite liked the way that it talks about dwelling negligently and diligently, and in terms of restraint over the eye faculties and over the senses, because it allows us to understand the teaching of sense restraint. Because sense restraint isn't about not using our senses, otherwise the Buddha said, blind and deaf people would be enlightened. All right, but if you look at this in terms of what we talked before about the effect on the mind, if the mind is soiled, great term that, soiled by what we're looking at, this is not beneficial for us, right? The one of, here we go. If you dwell without restraint over the eye, so you know someone who's looking at pornography, for example, the gross examples are the easiest. Then the mind is soiled by that, which is pretty obvious, right? It soils the mind. It makes it dirty. And when the mind is soiled among forms cognizable by the eye, there's no gladness. When your mind is soiled and dirty, you're not glad, and that's where it connects in with tonight's talk. When you're not glad, there's no rapture. So we get this same sequence again. When there's no rapture, there's no tranquility. When there's no tranquility, one dwells in suffering. Ain't that the truth in the world? If you don't have tranquility, you dwell in suffering. You don't become concentrated. Phenomena do not become manifest. In other words, you don't see things as they really are. If you dwell diligently with restraint over the eye faculty, like restraining what it is you look at, restraining what it is being selective over what you're listening to, being selective over what you're touching and eating and smelling and seeing. Just, we've got so many choices. We need to be selective over what we allow to go into our senses. If the mind is not soiled, gladness is born. When one is glad, rapture is born. When the mind is uplifted by rapture, the body becomes tranquil. When you're tranquil in body, you experience happiness. If you're happy, you enter samadhi. When you have samadhi, phenomena become manifest. Other words, you see things as they really are. Actually, the same sequence in different words. But here we're starting with sense restraint. So these three start from three different places. One starts from faith, one starts from virtue, and one starts from sense restraint. So faith, virtue, and sense restraint are all causes for the arising of gladness. And with the arising of gladness, you get the whole other sequence going on.
How long are you in Sydney for?
Another 2 weeks. I was going to go home on Sunday, but Ayya Rhoda has convinced me to stay, and I'm able to stay because Disenchantment Bhikkhuni here has agreed to go to Adelaide and look after my Adelaidean community for me, along with vipassana.
Please, Bob.
Huh?
Will you be back?
Yeah, I'm coming back regularly. I can even give a list of dates I'll be back in Sydney. That would be useful.
Because you'd love to have you again and try and get more people to know.
Yeah, it was short notice, so it's not good. And nobody here knows me. Like, who's this Santacari, and why would we want to go and see her?
That can change.
Of course it can. All things change,
Just another cool topic like relationships.
Well, the classic thing in the scriptures, a good word has gone around about this samana. But, it starts by that, we went to see this Bhikkhuni and she gave a great talk and we enjoyed it and it was really beneficial. And next time a few more people will come, But so I didn't really expect a full house because nobody knows me here. It's cool, there's no problem. I don't really get very many people in Adelaide and I've been talking there for ages. That's all right.
Yeah. So we shall spread the word. If you would like to see Ayya here again, please spread the word and let everyone know about this place and also for Ayya's return. Hopefully you can come back.
Yeah.
And then we can offer a space for you to talk.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah.
That'd be great. So when am I
Maybe
back?
even Ayya to
Yes,
your
I was
rooms.
wrong.
Okay. Well, of course, I'll be at Santi for the next 2 weeks, so you can come down and see me there if you want to just come and have a chat. You're welcome to. we're a bit short on dana at the moment, so maybe you should come down and... Oops, so that shouldn't be on the recording, should I? Encouraging people to come and bring dana.
We can take that out. So thank you so much, Ayya, for a very, very, very enlightening and deep conversation with all of us actually today. Part of what I wanted to do was not only share the suttas, but also have an open space for discussion. I think we've achieved both of that. Wonderful, so thank you.
And hopefully we had a bit of fun while we were doing it. Did we have some fun?
Yeah!
Maybe just
not
a little
the sexual
bit.
pleasure kind of fun, but yeah.
Pleasure in the
I like
dharma.
your acting. your dramatic passion.
Yeah.
Well, it's passion for the dharma, I guess.
Yeah, practice can be fun.
Yeah.
If it's too serious,
Absolutely.
you don't need. Yeah.
I tell them the same thing about work.
Work can be fun, just this moment.
Indeed.
Yeah, happy and happy, laugh and laugh. That's natural.
Yeah. So just a few announcements, if I may. So at the Metta Centre we've got... Sorry? Oh no, that's okay. We'll cover that anyway.
Okay.
So at the Metta Centre we've got a number of events that we're organising, and literally just a few hours ago I received an email from Ariya Nani, so Ayya is coming back again. She did a workshop with us last year, and she's going to come back and do another workshop on the 4th of March on the Brahma Viharas. So please come along. It's always wonderful having her. She also based her teachings on the Sutra as well. And then we also have an urban meditation retreat with Venerable Vimoka coming from Thailand. He came here last year, so he's returning again. And it's a day retreat, so 8th and the 9th of April, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. each day. So no overnight stay, but rather you come each day. And on the 13th of May, we've got Venerable Pandit, who's coming from Thailand, and he's also a speaker who came last year too. We're going to do something quite fun. We're going to watch a film screening, and then after that we're going to have a discussion. And if you want to join us for lunch, then we'll be having lunch before this film screening as well. So a really fun day with the Dharma.
Very good, very good.
And watch this space. There's actually a number of things that's filtering, and we're organising a few things, and once I get those details out, then I'll be able to share it with you. So if you're not on our mailing list already, then please add your name on the red book, because we can then add you to our mailing list. And then some regular events. On Tuesday there is the Living Buddhism course, and the topic for this Tuesday is on what makes us tick. And I'll be taking you through actually dependent origination, some of the aspects of it, but from an experiential perspective. And beforehand, I'll actually be giving a talk somewhere else. So if I'm a little late, then Justin, you're in charge. And then on Fridays, so coming Friday, finally yoga resumes, and we have Shweta coming to give us a yoga session from 6:30 to 7:30. And all of this is free. Don't even have to pay anything. That's going to be good. We had 2 people come and just ask the other day, what is this place all about? What is all this? And Amy was there, she was able to explain what this place is about. And they go, wow, all these amazing things, how much does it cost? And she's like, it's free. And I couldn't believe it. But because the Dharma is priceless, really, how can you put a price on that?
And speaking of which, I forgot to do Namo Tassa at the beginning, which I often do. So we're all chatting away, and then we kind of segue straight in.
Yeah.
So I'll do it now, and maybe you can kindly cut and paste that one for the beginning.
Well, usually I do an intro to introduce the speakers, but you were into it, so I thought, you know what, that's cool.
We were all having a happy chat time, and so I forgot to do that, but I'll do it now.
Yeah.
Because I do really respect the Buddha a lot, and have maybe a great deal of passion for the Dharma.
Yeah.
And so we just perhaps even just close with Namo Tassa, and that I think shows our respect and reverence anyway. So.
Wonderful.
Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Buddham dhammam sangham namasami.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Everyone happy, may your practice bring you great peace, and may your daily practice be fruitful.
Thank you. Should we go respect someone?
I don't know about you, but I am